Hello, as usual, we will be getting ready and we'll start very shortly. Mrs. Richards, since you're the only one on Zoom currently, could you let us know if you can hear us over the mics? You can just toss it in the Q&A or raise your hand or however you'd like. Oh, that'll work too. Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you, Brooke.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. I now call this board workshop of the South Woodbury School Board to order. As you can see, we're doing something a little different today. We're going to start out our meeting with a board self-evaluation mid-year based on the goals that we gave ourselves in June. And we're going to do it in circle with Dr. Moshe leading us. And then we will break out into our standard workshop format with bringing in community members and comments as we go through the school improvement plans and other items on our and policy notes on our agenda. But for now, it's just going to be us here in the circle talking so that we can really focus on our own self-evaluations. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Moshe.
Thank you. Just as a matter of lead-in, we've had circles going in our district for years in little pockets. This year, we chose to start building a culture of care based on the board's goal for us. And that involves common language. And we've heard about that over the course of the year. So tonight, beginning with a circle, I think is really the board modeling the process that it's asked us to engage in. So as the facilitator, I'm going to start with, first of all, this is the talking stick. It's portable. I carry it around on my ID. It says Falcons, much to the chagrin of the Orcas and the Cougars, but we will go with Falcons. So in circle, we establish ground rules, and pretty much we have established here in the board ground rules as well. So our ground rules are that we use I statements, we speak from the heart, we say just enough, we use the talking stick and attend to the person who has the talking stick. And it's certainly okay to pass. Any ground rules to add or modify to those ground rules tonight from anyone in this group? Okay, so we will start with name, preferred pronouns, and what you like about being a board member.
Brooke Williford, I use he, him pronouns, and I love getting the energy of the students secondhand.
Ann Johnson, she, her pronouns. And I really enjoy still being involved in schools at so many levels, even though my kiddos are out of school.
Marnie Jackson, I use she and they pronouns. And we missed the step of acknowledging the land and the first peoples of this space. And I love that that is not just a rote recitation, but something that we take very seriously. And I always look forward to the opportunity to reflect upon the Indigenous peoples of this land and how we live amongst and partner with them going forward to nurture all of our children.
Joe Green here, and I use he, him pronouns. And I like when community members, students, and parents come to meetings and we get to hear and see and find out about what they're learning and what's on their minds.
Audrey Gamerick, she, her. Something I like about being a board member is not necessarily just being more involved with the school community, but rather the greater community of the island.
Katya Schiavone, she, her pronouns. I like representing students in a place other than ASB and a more wide range of students and not just the high schoolers.
So I'm Joe Mocha. I use she, her pronouns. I'm superintendent in the district. And as part of the circle, I would like to say that I love being superintendent, and this board is the best board I've ever worked with. And I really appreciate how you hold us accountable. You're also compassionate, and you set goals for the district that are forward thinking goals. So the second prompt for tonight is, as we look at the board's self-evaluation, and I'm going to start in this direction, I would like you to talk about at least 2 things that you think the board does well.
I think the board does a good job allowing Audrey and I to have a voice at the table and really allowing us to put forth the ideas of students. And I also really appreciate seeing the board members at the school walking around. I know this week we had 2, and I really enjoy how much of an effort the board members put into speaking with students and not just the board representatives.
2 things I think the board does well. One is organization and procedure. I think a lot of times the board continues working on improving how we can have procedure at meetings and outside of meetings. And I think it's something as a board we take very seriously, and always keeping up with the latest procedure on, again, like Robert's rules and how we can just better that, and being very consistent and accountable with how we organize our meetings. Another thing I think the board does well is looking for ways to better ourselves, not necessarily just within our community, but looking through different organizations such as like WASDA conferences, and really hearing from other boards on what we can do to create a better community for our students at this district.
Let's see. Hard to narrow it down to 2. I think.
At least 2.
Oh, at least 2. How long do we have? I think we collaborate well, both as a board and also as a board plus executive leadership team. And specifically, I think we do a good job of knowing and staying within our roles to be able to work well together, so we're not stepping on each other's toes and trying to do each other's jobs. That's number 1. Number 2, I think we provide throughout the year ample opportunity to hear from community members, students, parents, and teachers through various venues, whether it's public comment or when there's major decisions to be made, special purpose meetings to gather community input.
Great question. I too really admire the way the leadership team collaborates, the ability of the board to empower you to do your excellent work, and your responsiveness to board direction, and your ability to live into the goals we set with your team. And I'm very grateful for the trust that's developed among the leadership in this district. And I also really feel that we've done a good job of looking to our mission and vision and turning that into actionable strategies to move the work forward, and always centering student well-being at the heart of what we do.
Two pieces of appreciation from me that I think the board does very well is, first of all, I think we do really appreciate how hard our community works to keep our schools functioning, including not only our staff and our teachers and our students, but our entire community. And so I feel like there's some appreciation we can give ourselves for that. The other thing I see is that we do embrace the idea of community coming together, that every single person in South Whidbey has a stake in how our schools operate, has a stake in our kids learning and becoming global citizens and finding those connections and that belonging.
One of the things I think we've done very well and continue to do well is center the people in the buildings, whether it's the students or the staff, but make our decisions with them in mind. Whether it's bringing two very eloquent board members, student board representatives onto the board, whether it's going into the buildings, whether it's listening to our building administrators or our superintendent, talking to teachers, talking to staff members, really focusing everything that we do on the people in the buildings. And then I think that, yeah, I want to go to something Marnie said, which is really putting our mission, vision, and goals first and foremost, and putting them at the heart of the goals that we give to the superintendent, our policy decisions, and our budgetary decisions.
As the superintendent looking in on the board's work and having worked with other boards, I think this board is particularly cognizant of the board's work and doing the board's work and being in the schools and being involved. And again, the holding me in particular, but the superintendent accountable and providing feedback. And so it's going to be hard for me to answer the next one. The next question is at least one, if not more, suggestions for how this board can improve its work for the district. I will go this way.
First thing that comes to mind is reaching out to people who don't feel like they have a stake or a voice in this district, whether they don't have students here, whether they feel like they've been shut down in the past, but reaching out to them to get their point of view as well, because we really want to be representing the entire district and everyone in it.
Plus one to Brooke, and also maintaining the level of cognizance and excellence and the boundaries we have set around how we operate within the district, and having appreciation for all of the moving pieces, keeping that motivation and keeping that going at the pace that we're at, and continuing to strive for that belonging for every student.
Yeah, I would like to clarify and diversify our pathways for student board mentorship here, and just understand how we continue to attract really engaged student board representatives, and also address some of the issues that have been raised around the way students involved in leadership might be more likely to step forward, and ensure that as you two succeed in this role, that others behind you can also succeed and perhaps represent parts of our student body that haven't yet sat at this table.
As I was very briefly reviewing our board's goals, distinct from the district goals, I just want to clarify here, I think we could do better at setting SMART goals for ourselves as a board. It was challenging for me to evaluate our progress towards the goals due to the way the goals were written. And then number two, to continue to pigeonhole myself as the data guy, I would like to see us more regularly review student performance data, especially disaggregated, so we can identify and eliminate outcome gaps.
I think something we can build on is the work we've done for student voice and not just leave this as this, but continue building on this because I've said this a lot, but there's truly no such thing as too much student voice. And I think, like Marnie mentioned, there's a lot of voices we still haven't heard, right? We still haven't heard at the table. And I think it's important to not necessarily just have student reps, but also to develop new ways so we can reach these voices. And I think that's a difficult task, but it's something we really need to narrow in on because, you know, we've sent surveys, we've had discussions in classrooms, but those sometimes aren't the best methods of reaching students. I think it's something hard. It's hard work, but it's something that needs to be done. So I hope I can continue that with my last year on the board and beyond that as well. And also kind of being able to structure this position as student rep where students aren't intimidated by it and they feel comfortable for applying it. And they also see it as a challenge, but not necessarily something to be intimidated by.
I think kind of adding on to what Marnie said, making sure that students that are in leadership have an opportunity to join the board and know about the position, and also that they can vote for the position. And it's not just the ASB kids picking and choosing who is representing the entire school, making sure that each student has a say in who really gets their voice heard.
I think for me, I would echo, believe it or not, what Joe said, which is how do we hold ourselves to goals that we really don't know how to measure? And so being more clear on what you're looking for from that. And I think tonight's presentation will help in that regard. And we can continue to refine how we present the data. So I'm thinking that is, we're going to do a checkout unless the board wants to provide any more input to itself on its process. Those were the only prompts I had for you to do a self-evaluation. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to do a one-word checkout on how you're leaving this meeting and going into the rest of the workshop. And I'll start this time and tell you that I feel valued and I value all of you.
Thoughtful.
Thoughtful.
Connected.
Gratitude.
Passionate.
Calm.
Excellent. Thank you all for engaging in your self-evaluation, and I have now relinquished the chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boscia. Give us just a moment as we reset the tables to welcome the community back into the conversation. I will note, Marnie, thank you very much for the reminder of the land acknowledgement. Let's, if you'd like to say more on that, let's do it after we reset.
Thank you very much. South Whidbey School District acknowledges that we gather on the ancestral homelands of the Lower Skagit, Tulalip, Swinomish, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish peoples. I invite you to read our full written land acknowledgement on our website and to embody the spirit of this land acknowledgement by continuing your learning about this land, its peoples, their history, their past, their present, and their future. If you'd like a resource to understand some of what the Tulalip tribes, our tribal neighbors to the east, are up to, I do recommend checking out tulalipnews.com. It's a website that includes frequent updates about cultural and educational activities in the Tulalip communities. And right now it actually has a really interesting article about the way the Lushootseed language is being revitalized through education at the pre-K through college levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a reminder, for those in the room, if you want to chime in on the conversation as we go, please just do so. The first time you do so, please note your name and where you live. If you're on the Zoom call, I don't know how many folks we have watching right now, but if you are, please just type your name and location in the Q&A screen. That'll let us know you have a question so we can pause, and then you can start typing it up and I will be quite willing to read it. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moshe and then the administrators to go through our school improvement plans now that we've self-evaluated.
Thank you. So we certainly are excited to give you a mid-year update on what's happening in our schools regarding the plans that were shared with you at the beginning of the school year. Next slide, please. Of course, we start with our vision, our mission, and our values, making sure that every one of our students leaves us as a lifelong learner, multiculturally engaged, literate, and active in their community. And I believe I've said this more than once, that our students demonstrate our mission and vision on a daily basis. Next slide. So we are focused on, these are the 3 district goals that the board has set for us. We've talked a lot about goal 1, and we just showed an example of how we're engaging in goal 1. And goal 3, certainly you've heard a lot about through the discussion of the 5-6 building, as well as the bond discussion. Tonight, we're focused on goal 2, which is leading the district in prioritizing training and implementation of best practices. That's really all about our school improvement plan. So I'm going to actually go to the next slide and turn to Susie Richards. Actually, no, this is Jeff, who is really in charge of our assessment in the district, and then move right on to Susie. This is pretty self-explanatory. These are the measures, but Jeff, do you want to just give a little blip on each one?
Yeah, I just wanted to call us back and remind us about the overall assessment performance indicators that we do in the district. We have our iReady ELA and math assessments that happen fall, winter, and spring, and those are administered K-8. Kindergarten we don't do in the fall because we do the kindergarten inventory of developmental skills, which is right below there. We also do our K-4 literacy screening. We use the DIBELS assessment and did do that in September, and Mrs. Richards will present a mid-year update on that. We continue to do WIDA screener for any student that enters the district with English language learning needs. And then, of course, we do our summative assessments for Smarter Balanced ELA grades 3, 8, and 10, and science grades 5, 8, and 11, and math grades 3, 8, and 10. So we're going to divide up by school and talk about mostly, or a lot of, our iReady benchmarking that has recently happened over the last 2 weeks. Shall we pass on to Mrs. Richards?
All right. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Great. All right. Hello, everybody. So sorry I couldn't be there in person. I've been dealing with a flu bug the last few days. So thank you for letting me be able to be here virtually. A lot of great news to share about our K-4. Just some great pictures. This is some recent, the new book club that's been formed with our 4th grade and our food drive leaders going to the Good Cheer Food Bank to learn more about how we support our community. Next slide, please. Going through our goal 1 and 2, just wanted to give some updates and progress about where we are. So I keyed in on some of the primary strategies that we have been using and implementing, and starting with the restorative circle work. I'll talk more about our RJ-Ed training, but we have moved to 100% of what we call our blue slip behavior issues. When an issue arises between students or between students and adults in the building, we write up what are called blue slips that we track on where our issues are happening. And we are now proud to say that 100% of our blue slip behavior issues are using restorative circles for problem solving. The children, even at the youngest age, understand it. They ask for it often and feel really good about how that culture has really taken hold in our school. The next thing I want to talk briefly about was our SWAP to PTA, Southwood Elementary School PTA, grade K-6. These ladies have worked so hard, the board, to bring our PTA back. They had to go through a lot of hoops with the state, and they're already up and running. They've provided us with funding for some upcoming assemblies that we're going to be engaging in. They just had a bingo night, and we had just a a sellout crowd. The entire cafeteria was filled with families who were just so excited to have these opportunities to gather again together. And they're going to continue to be supporting us in a variety of ways. So we just could not be more grateful for that. We're really expanding our opportunities, especially at fourth graders. We're having those conversations with our fourth grade students about they're really moving into even more of a leadership role as they become our first fifth grade class next year. And so we started the principal's advisory team that's third and fourth graders, and they have come up with just a wide range of activities, clubs, programs. It's just been so wonderful to see everything that's happening with them. All right, next slide, please. We engaged in an SEL survey, and I won't click the link now, but you all are welcome to take a look at it later. This is our pre-data that we engaged in. We developed this survey ourselves, and Erin Gutzmer and Amanda Potter have worked really hard to follow up with all of this data. We're looking at it together and, you know, making some determinations about what follow-up we need based on what we're learning. So that's been really exciting, and I'm excited to see how that post data in the spring looks. Family connections, again, this has been so important. Our families really want this. It's been one of our PLC work groups that you'll hear more about in a little bit. So our family engagement work they have done one family night so far, and there's another family day coming up called Read Your Heart Out. We're inviting families to come in February and read with their students, and just more of those kind of activities to bring families and school together. Our trainings have been really powerful. I'll talk more about that coming up, but Mandy Jones, our district behavioral specialist, has been working with our paraeducator staff, providing more training. She's amazing. We're so grateful for her work. And then, of course, our RJ Ed training. And those conversations have been, of all the district training since I've been in the district, the RJ Ed has brought forward the best conversations we've had as a staff around this work and why it matters and how we can be better at it. Next slide, please. I won't click on these for you right now, but would love it if you had a chance to take a look at some point. One of these is a record, South Whidbey record story on our MLK Day of Service. The second is a video that Lindsay DeMont's fourth grade class and Val Brown put together of all the projects that we engaged in as a school community. And then I want to share this picture. One of the projects that our art club has been working on is they want to do a school-wide art project. This is totally student-driven with support from local artist Shauna Davies. The name of every single student is signed inside that piece of art, and they love it. The children love it. I see them every day stopping by and taking a look at it. So just more opportunities for connection and community building. Next slide, please. Next, moving on to goal 2. This is focused on, of course, the prioritizing of training and implementation of best practices. Strategies we're using, of course, I'll be showing you our data, our iReady and Dibbles growth data. Best practices with UDL. It's just awesome. We engaged in an activity at our last staff meeting, and we were talking about equity. And people just totally are getting it, how UDL and equity, the deep connection between that work and the work of RJ Ed. None of this is siloed. It's all connected to how we do our very best work for our children. Our farm, forest, and sea environmental education focus. This has been really exciting for us. We received a $30,000 grant from OSPI to support our vision of having a scope and sequence that outlines from kindergarten through 5th grade, how each grade level will be engaging in this work with units, a farm, a forest, and a sea unit, diving deeply into our science standards as well as our ELA and math. It's all there. So that's really exciting. In fact, our 4th grade is going to be heading to the High Bulb Tulalip Cultural Center in the spring, the entire 4th grade. We're also going to be bringing you a request for an overnight at Fort Casey for our 4th grade, working with a wide range of community partners to provide a really exciting capstone project that we hope to expand in the years to come. And then what I really want to dig into a little bit more is our PLC work groups. Very excited about this and hope it's something we can expand as we move forward. Next slide, please. So at the very beginning of the year, we asked our staff what matters most to you as we look at as we look at professional development, and they came up with a list, and we voted and came up with these key initiatives. From there, we broke our staff up into their chosen groups with the goal of them developing presentations and engagement with our whole staff around what they've learned together and what they feel we need to do as a staff to move forward in these areas. Each group has had that collaborative time to work together, and I'll share one example of what's come out of some of these work groups. I've just never seen our staff so excited. I won't open this survey right now, but I did a survey about 2 weeks ago on how staff are feeling about these peer-to-peer led work groups. And I've never had a survey where there was 100% agreement. And I really encourage you to look at some of the comments as we think about PD moving forward. Our staff are hungry for time together. We have incredibly talented people on our staff. And I just really hope that we can continue to prioritize providing them time and opportunities to work together. Next slide, please. This is one example of one of our work groups. They presented at our last staff meeting. This was our trauma-informed practices group, and they did an incredible workshop for our entire staff that started with a buffet lunch, because that's what UDL is all about, right? Everybody gets what they need. And they modeled UDL for us. We engaged in some experiential activities together. It was the best. It was the best. So just excited to see what's to come next with these peer-to-peer work groups and presentations. Next slide, please. Next, I'm excited to share a little bit about our iReady data, comparing our fall 22 and winter 23 diagnostics. You can see our winter data is on the top and our fall data is on the bottom. So we are seeing some nice growth. You know, of course, while I'd like to see more green, we are midway through the year, and that's our challenge, right? Is how do we support these children and continuing to move into that grade level or above work. And we have some new ELA. We are in a pilot, which Kayla, thank you, Kayla, for your work in piloting 2 potential curriculums at our 3rd and 4th grade level. We're in year 3 of our K2 ELA curriculum, and we'll just continue to move forward in looking at how we best serve our students. And I did want to mention, not as any kind of excuse or anything, but that you know, while our academic focus is of course a high priority, we also know that our students have been through a lot in the last number of years, and that the SEL work that we're engaging in is also a very high priority for us. And we feel like we can do that together really, really well. And we're learning more about how we find that perfect balance. We know they have to have that to be ready to learn. Go ahead.
I just want to interrupt you for a second and just highlight that as an admin team, so Susie's giving you the highlights, each of your principals will give you the highlights, but as a team, this can go all the way down to the student level. So we can look at it by classroom, we can look at it at the student level, and it gets very granular into, you know, whether their needs are in phonics or language or vocabulary. So again, you're getting the 20,000-foot view, but there's a whole lot more data, Joe, to your point, below the surface on this. So thanks for letting me go, Susie.
Absolutely. And always happy to share at whatever level the board would like to see as we move forward. Next slide, please. This was our ELA. Then this is the annual typical growth data. Jeff's going to dive a little deeper into explaining what this annual typical growth data means. But you can see that, you know, 65%, as you can read down below, the median percent progress towards typical growth for the school is 68%. And that typical growth is the average annual growth for a student at their grade and baseline placement level. Next slide, please. This is our math data. Again, you can see we've seen some nice growth. We, again, really focusing on, as I meet with our staff and grade level teams, which is what we do after our iReady data comes out, we look at it by grade level together. Where we, and again, as Joe indicated, we break it down to those other levels. What are the specifics? Fourth grade as an example. Geometry has been an issue for many of their kids, and they determined for their student growth goal, every fourth grade teacher, their student growth goal for this year is focused around geometry. So the teachers are using that data as well to, drive where they're heading with their curriculum. Next slide, please. Again, this is our annual typical growth. Math, we have a little more work to do, but we continue to see that growth and really focusing in on that, being able to bring those children forward. Next slide, please. This is our ORCA reading program, and our ORCA reading program is our remediation support, specifically in reading. This graph is a little challenging. DIBELS comes out of the Oregon State University system, and it's a really quick measure that we use 3 times a year to assess acquisition of literacy skills. And for our use in the school, we also use that to qualify children who are not receiving special education services for this additional level of support with the ORCA reading program. This data also does represent, you can see down below, intensive support, strategic support, core support. The data is a little bit different. You can see the numbers are different. We do not assess kindergartners during the fall because they're just not ready. They need some more time. They're doing their walk-ins that work. And so the middle does represent kindergarten as well. I've developed some additional materials about our ORCA reading program that I'd be happy to share as we move forward about what strategies and curriculum are being used in that Tier 2 program. Next slide, please. And that is it for me. Any questions or comments from the board?
Thank you, Susie. Really great to see the data. I'm just wondering if you could define a few of the acronyms for folks in the room.
I sure would.
Thanks. You want to just go for it, or do you want me to flag the ones that?
Yeah, if you could flag the ones for me, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, so UDL is listed there, Universal Design for Learning. You also used SEL a lot, and PLC and PD.
You got it. Social emotional learning is our SEL work. PD, professional development. And what was the other one, Marnie?
PLC.
PLC is our professional learning communities. That's the work that we engage in as a district staff and as building staff. Specifically, our Wednesday time together is that PLC work.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Echoing the thanks for showing some of the data. Actually, you're on the slide I had a question about. So it's really great to see the improvements in both the ELA and the math scores from the iReady diagnostic. Although this one seems to show the opposite. If I look down at the bottom, it shows that more students need intensive support in the winter 2023 compared to the fall 2022. Am I understanding this chart correctly? And if so, how does that jive with the iReady assessment showing more students who are rising in their ELA abilities?
Sure. And Joe, a lot of that is because, as noted, the kindergarten students, when you look at that all grade status, the numbers on the bottom row marked all has a lower number of students in the beginning because kindergarten was not assessed at that time. And then the middle, all numbers are higher because kindergarten have been added. So that's where that discrepancy comes in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question about the circle use. I think it's fantastic that the students are asking for those and that they're all getting them. I was wondering if you're seeing any patterns developing around, I'm trying to find a good term for recidivism for students, because that feels a little harsh, but people having same or similar problems after circles.
You know, so much of what we're dealing with at this level is peer-to-peer conflict, honestly. And so while I don't know. I don't know if I could honestly say I'm seeing less of it. There's definitely less severity. We're not seeing as much hitting, which is a big one in the early times. Children need to learn, right? And so that's what we're working on together. Also learning about, that critical piece of empathy with the little ones, of the circle. Really, it's not just this rote say you're sorry, which means next to nothing, right? It's helping the children to really hear the other child's version. And it's very sweet. There's lots of unasked for hugs that happen between them. And I do believe that we're seeing, and the majority of that is kindergarten and first grade. And we're definitely seeing less of that physical aggression than we were at the beginning of the year.
Thank you. And yeah, I wasn't looking for numbers or anything, because I know that I didn't give you a heads up on that one. So yeah, I did have one general purpose question that each of
Sure.
you are going to be hearing is, where do you see the biggest need for further improvement, and how can we as the school board help?
Great question. Thank you very much. I think time together as a staff is really critical to our work. Time, our teachers, thankfully, we've been able to develop a schedule that provides team time during their planning. When the children are with specialists, our teachers typically have that time for planning, but that having that building level time together during our Wednesday professional learning time has been really critical. And I hope that we can continue to have that time together. The district training is fabulous, but just making sure we continue to have that building time.
Susie, I'm wondering how many kids you have currently who are in leadership in 3rd and 4th grade.
Oh my gosh. I would guess at this point about 80%. Honestly, if you count our clubs as leadership, right? Amanda Potter started, Shauna couldn't be there, but she held the first art club again last week, and so many children showed up that she's like, I have to rework this. I can't have this many children. So I'm counting kids, I'm counting clubs as leadership, and kids that are joining the book club because they feel like they have a role right at school, and that they have a voice, and that to me is leadership.
Thank you so much for offering that to those kiddos.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the intensity of focus on clubs, because I think that that's really important on finding a place where you belong. And so I love seeing it starting at this age.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say as well, I was so excited to see the growing engagement in leadership roles. I remember back when I was in elementary school, the mediator program was a big focus, but it didn't often leave a lot of room for opportunities such as book club or environmental club. So it's really great seeing these growing leadership opportunities that allow students to explore different interests. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, Mrs. Richards, but one question I have is, what are some ways you think we could measure SEL learning at the K-4 campus?
I think, Audrey, the SEL survey that we have done, and I encourage you to take a look at it. It's got a set of about 10 questions that every 3rd and 4th grader went through. There's a link here that you can take a look at, and then I'd be happy to talk further with you about it. And it's giving us some real information, questions like, do you feel safe in the cafeteria? Do you feel safe? Do you feel like you have at least one friend? Do you feel like your teacher likes you? Some of those really basic questions, and that's going to give us some direction on where we need to focus more of our energy.
I have a question about the process of creating new clubs. If a student doesn't see a club that they like, I believe it was art, sports, and drama. If they would like to create, let's say, a music club or something, is there a process that they can go to that and create one?
Yeah, absolutely. We have our principals advisory team, and I have 2 to 3 representatives from each 3rd and 4th grade classroom. So we're kind of focusing this at 3rd and 4th grade right now. And those children go to their classes and they talk to their class before we have our meetings, and they bring back that information. So we try to gather that data directly. There's going to be a survey that the students who are in the principal's advisory are working on and want to give to students. They just haven't quite got it together yet, but they're working on it to find out what else children want to see happen.
Are there any questions from the other administrators or community members who are here in the room or on the Zoom call?
Yes, I'm going to get down in the weeds here a second. Concerning the restorative practice, trauma-informed practice,
Yes.
do you have instances where you have to clear the classroom because of the trauma? Do you have a policy for that situation?
There have been instances where we felt it was in the best interest of a child to do an early library visit or do a little early, so we have time to support a child who is having strong emotional issues. We do that very, very rarely, and we do it in a way that does not cause additional trauma to the other students who are taking an early lunch or recess. In terms of policy, there's definitely policy that guides the work that we do with that child who is having the emotional challenges.
And just for the record, sir, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and location, that would be helpful. I know it's formulaic, but I appreciate it.
Bill Carruthers, Clinton.
Thank you so much.
Any other comments or questions?
All right. Thanks, everybody, so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richards, and congratulations on the progress that you've shown at the school. And I love hearing that the staff is really excited about the PLC groups. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I hope you continue to feel better.
Yes.
Thank you. Me too.
Thank you for taking the time to be here. Yeah.
I'm always thankful to be able to follow the amazing Susie Richards. So our South Campus School Improvement Plan, my tact on it is, what have we done through our milestones that we presented to you in October? What things have been completed? Where are we at as we move forward? And then I'll show you some of our ELA and math data. One of the key components of the way our campus is organized is around advisory. And when I presented in October, I suggested we would be doing these things. And we have done these things. And one of the things that we are still working through, as we all know with the South Campus closing, is the transition plan with students to the middle school and what that building plan and relocation plan will look like. And so I put those as in work, but we have completed all the other milestones there. Super excited about our student-led conferences in November. We had 96% of our families meet with their child and our advisors, and that percentage is very high comparatively to conferences that happen in, say, an auditorium. I'm shutting the door. All right. One of the things I continue to hear from our students this year is the questions that are coming up about what next year will look like, what the transition to the secondary campus will look like, and and there's just a lot of concern and focus around that. And how we are spending our energy as teachers and as a staff is working with those students at advisory to honor those questions. The superintendent has been meeting with a key group of students that are offering more, I would say, structural questions. And then we're getting down into how it might look like in advisory class, letting students sit in circle and ask those questions in a vulnerable way with their peers. Our ELA information, I know that Mrs. Richards showed that. What you're looking for is more green and less red as an obvious departure. But you're looking, as you go from diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2, obviously the groups and the shifts for each of those students as they move between the levels of proficiency. And this is a look at 5, 6, so both the 5th and 6th graders. But we're really concerned with expanding and reducing the students that are like, what is that, 3 or more grade levels below? And obviously we want students on grade level. If we go to the next slide. One of the things Mrs. Richards highlighted was the progress towards annual typical growth. So if you look at that, that's actually a full year's growth. If they're at 100%, they've met a full year's growth. So 50% would be where they should be right now for a winter benchmark. And so if you look at ELA across 5-6, we're already there at our goal. Now, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that every child is at 5th or 6th grade level? No. That means that in the fall, their diagnostic showed them and put them at a placement level. They were given a typical growth, basically a typical growth direction and score, and then also a stretch growth. And so this is saying that 100% of the kids are showing that they are going to meet their growth as it was related to where they were placed in September. If you want to learn more about it, we put the link there. So you can go kind of read the iReady information about what that actually means. If you have more questions about there, I'm happy to answer. All right, next slide. Math, same. We've had, again, we're moving in the right direction across both grade levels. And if you look at the next set, you'll see that it doesn't have one. So go to the next slide, Christy. You'll see 5-6 has, is at 81% for math, whereas it was at 100% for ELA. What I wanted to kind of show is, okay, what does that mean to our staff? So we meet as a PLC and basically as a group about our ELA and math. We do a dive into what is happening with each student and each student group. And if you look at the next slide, I did this I showed 5th and 6th grade. And in ELA, there's something interesting happening there. And I don't know if it's obvious, but I'll point it out. We're doing really well in 5th grade, almost at 100%. We're at 125% in 6th grade. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see what's happening in math. There's a difference. So we were getting that 86% across both grade levels. But as a staff, and the purpose of this data is for us to go through it and analyze, why is 5th grade looking like this and why is 6th grade looking like that? And when I query our teachers, I continue to just be amazed at their ability to dive into the individual. You can drill this all the way down to student level, obviously, and even into each domain of math and ELA, and just continue to be amazed at their eye to, okay, this is the unit I was teaching, this is the unit I'm going to teach, and this is why I'm going to teach it, because I'm seeing this type of typical growth in these areas and where we're going to move forward. All right, next slide. We have, as we presented in October, our goals 1, 2, and 3. And one of the things that we continued to, and I liked how Susie presented these couple of specific things. We have done all of these things. And what is important for us to reflect on is what is not yet done, not yet completed. And one of the things that happened the other day is, or about a month ago, I had a couple of parents come to me and they're just super excited about a culminating outdoor experience for their students. And so they started a planning process. We've surveyed parents. Do you want to send your child on a multi-day outdoor overnight experience? What's still available now for planning here in April and May? Of course, we found several camps that were fantastic or experiences in March, and the weather was problematic. So these, I just want to thank Katie Shapiro and Meg Gluckman. They came together and they basically started calling every place in the state. And they came up with a opportunity in 2 locations. One was over in Leavenworth at Lake Wenatchee over there. And then one is at Camp Kirby, which is on Samish Island. And we have, the 5th and 6th grade has traditionally gone up to Padilla Bay to the estuary center and spent a day up there. And Samish Island is at the north end of Padilla Bay. So I'm super excited that we have come to a solution and a conclusion. And the survey is saying, as parents have spoken, they do want their kids to go, they're willing to chaperone, and they're willing to pay for the whole thing. With that said, Mrs. Richards had applied for the outdoor education grant that there was quite a bit of target for 5th and 6th graders in it. And so there's quite a bit of money. And so I'm excited to say that not only did we have the grant, we have parents who are committed to participating, but also the Schools Foundation has also said they would be interested in supporting. And one of the things our teachers did is they voted to give up their individual teaching grants from the PTA and pool them all together towards a culminating experience for the 5th and 6th graders. So there's going to be some super fun things coming up. Not only the experience at Camp Kirby, it'll be a kind of a 5th grade leaves on Monday, and Wednesday, the 6th grade goes up and swaps out with the 5th grade at noon, and then the 6th grade comes home on Friday, kind of thing. And for the board, you'll see a request for that overnight field trip approval on the next agenda. But I'm just super excited that there's this enthusiasm about providing a culminating outdoor experience for our kids as the school closes and we transition to the middle school. So anyways, that's going right now. Next slide are our goals 2 and 3. We continue our UDL work, our Universally Designed Language for Learning work, which we have been engaged in now for 4 years through the Inclusionary Practices Project, and where I've seen such a amazing vertical alignment between the school board goals themselves, the superintendent goals, the principal goals, the teacher goals, and now vertically aligned throughout the entire district towards a more inclusionary and just commitment to providing inclusive environments for our kids. And so we're moving along on goal number 2. Go ahead and move on to goal number 3. Oh, we already talked about that. That was our iReady data. So do you guys have any questions for the South Campus and what we are doing as we approach mid-year?
Well, I'd first like to offer some congratulations and gratitude for that 96% at conferences. That's a huge and astounding number. I remember being both a teacher and a parent in the empty auditorium. Yeah. And I think that touches on more than just kid-directed work and student voice, but also parent comfort. I have a husband who had adverse experiences as a child in school. And so every time he comes across like any sort of teachery authority, he falls apart. And so student conferences for us, he wanted to be the best parent he could be, but it was very hard for him to be across from a teacher and not feel small and not feel like he was the dumbest person in the room. And so the universal design of having kids and parents have that facilitated conversation with professionals alongside is so powerful. So I appreciate that absolutely. And that language that those kiddos are learning in school and that language that is being mirrored for parents at those conferences is also really valuable to have those at the table or in the car at home conversations so that it becomes more than how was school? Fine. And so I love that. The other comment that I have is that I'm so glad that outdoor education is, about to thrive. Again, it's, that's just on top of everything else that you can speak of in just being outdoors and stewarding land and learning those practices, but just the community building that comes from being outside your regular classroom element and working together and being together and sharing meals, and all of those pieces are so powerful. So thank you so much.
I've heard you and you and you, and our staff has heard, and the power of student voice is really what is at the heart of a student-led conference, our assemblies, the way that our advisory is built. It's all about trying to provide as much access and inclusion to the student's voice in the process as we can. And thank you.
I share that excitement, and congratulations on those achievements, and getting this outdoor culminating experience back up and running is just so important. I have incredibly profound memories of my 5th grade trip, which happened to coincide with the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. So it went on a little longer than we had expected after the bridge collapsed, but that's another story. I just wanted to ask if in that slide where you showed the math progress being quite different between 5th and 6th grade, if your teachers can think back to what was being taught during remote learning and whether that might have played a role in the different achievement between those 2 grades.
It's a great question. I always hesitate to show the by grade because in our small school, it's really easy to go immediately to one classroom or one classroom teacher. And I don't think it's that simple a answer. I think that COVID certainly played a part, preparation did. But when we're looking at growth, we're actually looking at where they presented in September and where they are now. It's not really a judgment of how they compared to other students or how they compared to national standards. This is a comparison of how they have grown as compared to their benchmark in the fall. And so would I like to see that number be stronger? Yes, but it's also exactly where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I was going to say 56% is above the halfway point now. If we didn't have the 100% to compare to, we'd be going, hey, that's pretty good.
And so I'd like to celebrate the fact that these are the same kids that are taking the ELA test and the math test, right? This is how their current performance is showing growth in math compared to ELA.
Yeah, I certainly don't see it as a shortcoming. And I also see this as a measure of success for teachers and students in those classrooms. Thank you. Oh, and I did have just one additional question, which was, are there any supports needed beyond the board's approval to ensure that every student can have a great experience during the culminating trip?
Well, I would never want to not take that opportunity and say resources are always necessary. We have some amazing staff that are willing to go spend, in this day and age of being off in cabins with students and chaperones and all of the other things that go along with that. It's a time now where these things are they always have been, but they're more challenging now than they ever have been. And I have some students that have disabilities that, to me, we don't go to camp, just because we want to and we're able to. We all go to camp, and we all go to camp together. And it's how do we provide those supports to enable some of the students that would struggle with an overnight experience, a multi-day experience, those kind of things. So we'll probably have some staff needs. With that said, I'm amazed by the support we've already received, and we have amazing parents that are going to step into those roles, and let's do this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say it was fantastic seeing all the field trips coming into shape. I think field trips are extremely important, especially living on an island, right? To seek other perspectives and kind of explore the outside world and explore things we don't necessarily see on this like small chunk of rock. And I also think it's important coming out of a pandemic, right? A lot of students spent so much time at home that they never really got the opportunity to explore new places. And I'm glad that's something we're going back into as we come out of the pandemic. I would also like to say, to Anne's point, it was amazing to see that much involvement in the student-led conferences. It is so important to have students at the table. So not only they can communicate with their parents, but also with their teachers at the exact same time. And I think it has students more engaged in their learning because they know their parents are more engaged with it as well. So thank you for sharing that. One question I have is I saw that it's actually on this slide, student voice directs the culture, and that was marked as met, which is really great. Could you please share an example of student voice directing the culture at the K6, at the 5-6 campus?
Yeah, thank you. I think that, and this actually came out of the amazing equity work that was happening at the high school level, where the monthly equity themes were shaped for the entire district. And so how we do this is that each advisory class plans and prepares the equity assembly for that month. So they're all of their student voice is driven into they're in charge of the assembly, they're in charge of presenting the work that they're doing and sharing with their peers strategies, knowledge, things that are important to really living that equity theme. With that said, we also have a ASB, and we have ASB leadership that is heavily involved in how we run anything from a bake sale to to our assemblies, and those students are the student voice that is leading that through our school.
Thank you, Audrey. I was going to ask the same question, but thank you for getting there ahead. And thank you, Dr. Fankhauser, for starting to explain some of that and then filling in some more details there. I appreciate that. I do want to apologize to you, Dr. Fankhauser, for interrupting your presentation to have you close the door. I could have just as well and easily gone up and done it myself. So I apologize.
I'm just as good at closing doors. Yeah.
I loved seeing you say there are risks, and I agree with showing desegregated data by grade, but I think it's really valuable to show us as an example of some of the more detail that you can get from these assessments. I think that's really valuable for us to see that and know that even if we don't need to see more detail than that, that the staff has access to that. And I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Ms. Richards, which is, where do you see the biggest need for improvement and how can we help?
I think the board's outlined the need to close the campus as we head throughout the school year. So your support in helping our staff and our students with those transition milestones that are super important to making sure it's successful, positive, and ultimately we land on the other side of closing the building in a super positive way. And so it's simple stuff. Just be supportive of our staff, what they're going through, and be supportive of what our students are going through. And I definitely have felt that from this board and don't have any doubt that you'll be there when those needs arise.
Congrats on the improving iReady scores. It's really great to see, and special props for drilling into that, into the subject level and finding that bimodal distribution across the two grades. I think it's always great to see the curiosity, I guess, that drives exploration into the data to use it to improve student outcomes. I have a question on goal 1. There was a bullet point that said discipline tracking, and I've never heard that term before. So could you please explain what it is and then how it's met?
We transition from the elementary school where we're using Swiss to track our discipline data through the blue forms that Mrs. Richards was talking about, to beginning to use Skyward and the discipline modules that we're using at the middle school and high school. And so that tracking process starts to show, every discipline incident is right on each student, tracked by student record. And so when we are also using the restorative justice process with our students. And what I am seeing from that process is some students being in discipline or needing discipline less frequently. But some students clearly identify a need for more discipline intervention. And when we do that, we then usually pair that up with some kind of a time with our counselor where we're spending time where students can talk about their student conflicts in a neutral location, usually with each other, with this kind of restorative justice process. And so for me, where I see our discipline starting to become, it's less what we see at the K4, it's more in line with where we're going to with the 712.
Thank you.
Anything else from board members or community members? Thank you, Dr. Fankhauser.
Thank you. South Whitby Middle School 7-8 update for you guys. Here's some photos. I try to get in classrooms, snap pictures, and I try to also, if I get one, I'll share it to a parent or guardian, a little snapshot in the day. And oftentimes it's met with a smile, and it's great to see them. Oh, they talked to me about skating and PE or something. So these are just some of their activities and faces that I get to see every day. This looks a lot like what we showed you in the fall. So on the left side would be some of those actions or look fors, and then on the right is a bit of an update in it. If you've noticed that we worked really hard to align our goals, so almost identical to Ms. Richards and Dr. Fankhauser's. This one is in that RJ Ed Community Circle work. Mr. Williford, you'll see 2 examples of community circles tomorrow in classes in 2 different ways. So I'm excited for you to see that. So that focus of RJ Ed has been abundant in our school. Middle school is a challenge. I think all of us have survived it. But it's been a really great critical tool. Mr. Patton and I sent 28 students to a 2-day intensive training that we've all participated in as well. And that has been really impactful on students. As the new semester started, some of those students co-facilitated circles in their classroom to reset norms in the classroom. I have one student who needed to participate in an intervention and was able to utilize some of the knowledge from that experience. And we'll be debriefing with them to figure out, what do we do with your knowledge and how do we transfer it to more peers, and how do we integrate it even more frequently? Similar to the discipline tracking of Dr. Fankhauser at 5-6, we're utilizing those restorative circles in the tier 1, kind of those smaller infractions like Susie was mentioning, and then those tier 2 ones, some peer conflict resolution one today. I had a great one with 2 students that had some ongoing conflict. We ended with some agreements, and then we agreed that, well, let's share this agreement that we've listed together to the staff that we work with so they can support our resolution to our families. And then we set a date stamp of when we're going to come back together to look at it to see how things are going. So that felt like everybody left with more clarity, empathy, and understanding of how the process works, and then how do we as peers get along in class, at lunch, or in other settings, and how can we transfer this information at home so that I could be supported on that end too. Community circles I've seen in a lot of different formats, including classroom engagement for content learning. So you'll see one tomorrow. Ms. Mylan's students did a STEM activity where it's Black History Month, so they did research on a person of color and their role in the world of STEM. So they're going to utilize that in a community circle. So you'll get to see how students engage in that process through that learning. We do House of Reps to engage in student voice. A lot of students involved in that are 7th graders who are recognizing the role that they're going to play next year as the 8th graders to 2 incoming classes. So we're starting to prepare them for what's that going to look like for you, as well as the 2 grade levels coming, and what opportunities do they have to welcome in to 2 new grade levels. So we meet monthly to talk both about activities for this year, but also those the ambiguity of next year and what it's going to look like, and steps and things that they can support with us. On the left, you'll see our yearbook. One of their goals was to have each student visible at least 3 times. There's 9 kids in the yearbook class, and they're still on target to meet that need. So I just got to give a shout out to those students and Brooke Cornwell, who works with them on that. So they are feeling on track. And it's a really cool creative group that they're going to make that happen. We have high school peer tutors that have been there. This is our 2nd year having multiple peers tutors in our math classes in our resource room. So it's expanding that academic, that social emotional support and that mentorship. And to me, that's reciprocal for both the mentor and the mentee. So now we're starting to get into that second wind of students now asking to seek out that role versus myself or one of our teachers doing that. So that's been really wonderful to see. In a couple weeks, we start some collaboration with some more proactive anti-bullying work it's about respect. It teaches consent and other pro-social behaviors at the middle school level. This is through the Department of Health. And so you'll see that, and students will, both in advisory and a social media level between February and March. We had a little hiccup in some data for SEL. We asked students, do they have an identified staff member that they've established trust with or feel connected to? So our 7th grade survey, our 7th graders got the teacher feedback one. So they're going to take that one in a couple days. But the 8th graders were at 79%. So what we're doing as a staff is looking at, okay, we have 21% of students, which averages out to about 18 kids, who said sometimes or no. So with that data, we're going to look at we're going to look at what extracurriculars are they involved in, what other factors do we have, and how do we start to connect that? So that goes into the yes category. Next slide. The second one aligns with that UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, that you've heard about in the K-6 world. Something our staff participated in last year and will do again this year is those peer-to-peer walkthrough tools. So teachers are pairing up with a partner and they're going through each other's classrooms, and they're using Universal Design for Learning tool to see what strategies they're seeing in their classrooms that they have tried or they're curious about learning more about. And then they give each other feedback. And so 100% of us will be done with that by the 15th. And then on the 22nd, they'll have time in PLCs or those professional learning collaborations to sit down and talk about what they saw, ask about wonderings, and even strategize. Like I have that student as well. Tell me how this has engaged them in learning in your class, and how can I transfer that knowledge into my space. It was really fun last week. Most of middle school classes are year-long classes. Electives change for most, and either PE or history changes. So a lot of students had at least 1 or 2 new classes, but all staff and all classes engaged in reviewing the norms that they set as a 7th grader. And now they're a middle 7th grader. So a lot of times there's some maturity or change. People shift into the classroom, the lunchroom evolves. So what they did is they sat down and they reviewed them. They reset them. They figured out what's still working, what's being met, what's irrelevant, and how do we make sure it works within our community. So I'm going to show you a couple examples in a minute. And a couple of those classrooms brought an RJ Ed trained kiddo to help co-facilitate that, which brought some more student voice and ownership to that. Something new Mr. Pat and I have been working on this year based off feedback from staff, based off of the things we talked about in the fall, was more time with vertical alignment. So if I'm a 7th grade English teacher, sitting down to talk to a 10th or a 12th grade English teacher about what are your expectations, what's your scope, what is common language that you're using in class, is something we've integrated. We've done it 3 times and we've gotten positive feedback. We'll continue to do that. That's also allowing them to see how those inclusionary practices are relevant at a 12th grade classroom all the way down through kinders. And more time to align to, we have a lot of new curriculum or a lot of modifications that we want to make sure are meeting the needs of our learners. And I'll show you a couple of examples on the next 2 slides of some of those norms and agreements that were set up. And what I like about them, go ahead, is the differences that you see. So the one on the left is the 7th grade history class. And some things I really liked is the actionable intent of the students and also the teacher's accountability to it as well. And then also you can see the breakdown of what it sounds like, looks like, feels like. So I see a lot of UDL embedded in these conversations. And then they wouldn't agree or sign this until they had 100% agreement. On the right, a little bit more of a creativity measure. And some of these are universals. And some they had conversations about, like, why is water the only thing acceptable in this class? So they talked about safety, they talked about cleanliness, distractibility, and they all agreed to commit to that. Next slide. Another couple examples for you as well. And what I liked about the one on the right is the respect for everyone's perspectives, preferences, pronouns, personal space, and effort. There was a lot of conversations about just the humanistic approach to the world of English, what they're reading, what you're walking into from your day before, the class before, the moment before, and how you can contribute to the community and also build that empathy. Next slide. This is that third one that K6 does as well with iReady. So these are some of those actions or look fors that is supporting it. One that I really like is that one-on-one conferencing that Dr. Fankhauser touched on. So as students were taking this time, teachers were pulling up their results and they pulled up fall and winter, and students were talking about their growth or areas that they were still struggling in. A couple asked, I felt like I rushed through that, or I'd really like to retake it. And that's something we valued this year's assessment retakes. So we try to honor that within our time frame. So some of our data updates include, next slide. Here's our reading progress. We're in the middle of our curriculum adoption for 612. We have a lot of great teachers, and an area we were really wanting to focus in on was vocabulary. We feel it's pretty critical to, as they get into critical thinking and upper level text, and I'll highlight that in a minute. So the triangle on the right is the one we took in fall. The one on the left, the one we took within the last week or so. Like Dr. Jeff said, more green, less red is the goal. So we're seeing a lot of improvement in our reading. Next slide, please. And these are those stretch goals that Dr. Jeff was talking about as well. What I liked about this is students see their typical growth, but then they also see their stretch growth goal. So it's, if we're at 100%, 106% now, students are starting to get a look at what their stretch growth could look like and how that's attainable to them. iReady in that conversation with that teacher helps them to focus in on an area that they're still developing, which might inform the type of book they might pick for their book club, or how they use their choice time, whether it's focused in vocabulary or another area. So there's a lot of dialogue around the that data they get on themselves, and then where they can go between now and the end of the year. I want to really isolate vocabulary. One, to give you a snapshot is what teachers see. And this is done so to me, reading is not just your ELA teacher, it's science, it's PE, it's health, it's all of our teachers. And most of them have a common goal within their own personal year-long goals. So they collaborate together to talk about it. I want to isolate vocabulary, and this one's a little more complicated, but essentially in most areas, we're seeing progress or growth in both grade levels. That's for one. In our pilot, we looked at vocabulary as an area where we have concern with. So we piloted and are working in a program called MEMBEAM, which we've kind of reintegrated and re-looked at how it's used in a classroom and how it's not drill and kill, but it's also a necessity to their learning. So most students are doing 20 minutes a week in some level. So we're seeing growth in that, even though it's been about 6 weeks since we started it. Here's math as well. Geometry is the one that early on we were looking at recognizing probably one of our greatest areas of weakness. Again, the triangle on the right versus the triangle on the left. We're seeing slower progress. That area in yellow is an area we want to look at even more so, where it's those students that are just a little below grade level, maybe not identified on an IEP or for additional support, but maybe have one or two areas when we break it down at the individual level of, oh, I see that they are just a little low in this area. How can we build that up a little bit in class? Same for math as reading there at that 100%. I had a student, he qualified for an IEP a year ago. And he grew 2 grade levels from fall to winter. And just the celebration and the bond that his teacher and him had when they reviewed his data was a really heartfelt experience to get to watch and take the ownership in his learning. He felt like he knew he used to have to take the iReady 3 times a year, but really slowing down and saying, hey, this is where your progress is and here's why. And this is where this is, and this is what we're going to focus on, is a pretty impactful time. It takes about 4 class periods to get through all of this with all those data check-ins. But we see a lot of value in the responsibility that they take in their learning and where they know that their focus is headed for. And questions on for the lovely South Whitby Middle School.
I just want to thank you for drawing our attention to how involved the students are in understanding this data and taking it to heart. It feels really different to think about measuring students for measurement's sake versus measuring students so that they can recognize the magnitude of their own achievements and also set more ambitious goals for themselves. And I feel like that's just a really beautiful way of using the numbers to help spark continued passion for learning. Thank you.
I think it's also really great to see clubs, especially yearbook. I'm in the library the same time they are, and it's really great to overhear their conversation and how they're working through things. And I also have the opportunity to talk to them sometimes, and it's really great to see their process and everything, especially since a lot of times they are on their own and it is their own direction. So that's really great to see. I also really like how the 7th graders are being like kind of moved into the leadership position because they're taking on 2 new grades next year instead of just 1, and really seeing that leadership growth I think is really cool. If you could talk a little bit more about how specifically that's going to work.
It's a great question. There'll be some logistics. Ms. Hunter and I, the 5-6 counselor, have started talking about more logistical things, but it's a lot of helping to give answers to things we have answers to already. There's some things I don't have an answer for yet. For example, who exactly will be in a certain position, but I can help students to know the role that they're going to play. And then soon we'll be starting to collaborate on having myself come down to meet more students at 5-6. I think Dr. Jeff is trying to talk me into going to that overnight trip, which I think it sounds like a great opportunity. And helping those students acquaint and then bringing some of my 7th and 8th graders down and then eventually having them come to start and tour to figure out, oh, this is where the middle school is. This is how our transition works. This is where I go from here to here to acquaint to the campus to recognize where the Cougars are, what that looks like for them, and then start to get comfortable in their own campus.
Well, I can't speak on behalf of every student right now. I think a lot of students can agree that standardized testing in general is like such a hard thing to do, and just being able to sit in front of a computer, right? And then when you get your test score back, you're like, okay, I got this score. You know, it is what it is, right? Maybe I'm just like not naturally smart, but I think being able to analyze how to grow is so important. And it also kind of gives students a motivation to be more engaged in their learning, right? And focus on different areas. So I think that's something really great, is to be able to reflect on not necessarily just seeing a data point, but what it means and what it means for growth. I also think it's really great to see student reflection in their learning and be able to take in what they're learning and reflect on how they're going to use it outside of school. And again, becoming a lifelong learner is something you grow by reflecting on what you learn. And to Katya's point, leadership opportunities are so important, and it's great seeing the House of Reps blossom.
2 things that really stuck out for me. I love the opportunities I saw in one of your look fors was multi-age tutoring. So 7th and 8th graders having some opportunities, which is fantastic. And I really look forward to hearing as 6th graders are integrated into the building, how more of those multi-age opportunities, maybe even outside of tutoring, can happen. I know there's no answers for that yet, but I really look forward to that. The other piece that really made me happy was thinking about, UDL and RJ and some of our equity practices really also being spoken to around lunchrooms and other public areas, because sometimes that's a third place that kids have that they don't have outside of school. And so having those places feel just as safe and comfortable as a classroom and having trusted adults in those spaces with them feels really great. So I really appreciate that work that's being done, and work that's being done and facilitated by kids. That's really powerful.
Yeah, and I'll echo an experience I had last week. At the beginning of the semester, we have the new commons known as the Cougar Den and the old commons, the Falcons Nest. We'll get there. But for safety reasons, we decided for safety reasons as well, but next year we'll have students designated by their grade level. So we kind of made the choice this year to have 7th and 8th graders separated for the semester, mostly for safety reasons. It was just getting a little chaotic. And I was in Miss Mylan's classroom, and they were talking about our lunchroom expectations, going over them, and they voiced their frustration with it. But they were also open to the conversation as to why the choices were made. And it came to the agreement that it is nice when a lunchroom is safe and calm and acceptable for everyone. So it was a great experience for them to let me know that, yeah, that was frustrating. We don't love it, but they were also open to hearing the why behind it. So it felt like, okay, we all made some adjustments and agreements, and now we understand a bit more.
I want to talk about that number, the 79% of eighth graders have someone they can trust. So first of all, I appreciate how you looked at that number and said, who's the 21% that are missing from there? Because I would have looked at it and been like, okay, 79, that's pretty good. It's a high number. So I love that you're striving for, more trust and more belonging. And I'm curious, on a number like this, do you have the data from either the cohort, so like what these eighth graders reported last year when they were seventh graders, or even last year's eighth graders, so we can just see how eighth graders in general, feel and how this trend is and how it's trending?
Yes, the question might be different based off of when I wrote last year versus our counselor, Ms. Brim, this year. So I think there's, a variable to that, but a pretty closely tracked question was this, because it's something that the high school looks at as well. So I could pull that out to see what are we looking at and what's lacking, or what are some other variables that these students that don't yet have somebody identified might have that we can focus in on.
Cool, thank you. And then I have another unrelated question. You had mentioned the ELA pilot, and I think it showed up in one of these slides. You mentioned it verbally, something to do with vocab. I'm wondering if you could give a little bit more information on how the pilot is going and, how are you going to decide whether to incorporate it in permanently or not?
We're about a year in. About last spring, we started identifying our team, doing needs assessments and our rubric development. So our elementary we have a 3-5 team that's in their second pilot of a curriculum. So between those two, we'll make decisions after the second pilot as to which one serves our needs and meets our needs by our rubric. And then we'll bring that one to the board for approval. 6-12 is a little different, as we're not looking for so much as one comprehensive curriculum. So we have worked in development on needs assessment, and what most of us did over the spring and summer was read a lot of instructional information for teachers to bring. Our idea is looking, how do what we adopt now, how does it outlive us? Because adoptions just aren't that frequent anymore. So this might meet my needs now, but how does it meet a future teacher and students down the road? So we're looking at that and what we can leave them and what I can read and what you can read and what we can collaborate on that builds from 7th grade to 9th grade. Then we looked at scope and sequence. A lot of it is a lot of vertical alignment. The team just created, and now we're piloting a bias rubric for novel selection. So we went through, and then we had one of our ethnic studies teacher come in and help us with the language. And now we're piloting that based off of novels we've read, or we're wanting to pilot with our students to see what is the library, what are our students reading, and what are we bringing to them. So I'm pretty excited to see how that develops. So you'll hear a lot of in-depth in that in May. But the vocabulary we isolated because we wanted to focus in on it. So we went with 2 things. One's focused on grammar, and the second one is called Membeam, which is a vocab specific online tool. Maybe 1 or 2 of you have used it in class a couple of times to get some hard data on, is this one we want to continue forth and go for a multi-year purchase with this type of company, or do we want to end it at 1 year?
Thank you. Wow, really thorough answer. I appreciate that.
One thing, that trusted adult question also shows up on our CEE survey and goes back multiple years, and we can track it by cohort also there. So that's another place that we can track that by cohort come this spring. The 79% and your response stood out to me also. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how the staff comes up with ways to reach out to those 18-ish students. I think that's fantastic that was the immediate reaction there. I loved seeing the ideas and verbiage in those agreements that were clearly student driven. Like no teacher would come up with some of this language. It just wouldn't happen. And so I love seeing that clear evidence that students are driving the process of creating these agreements. You also mentioned assessment retakes, and I love that. I'm so happy that you're doing that, because I don't care when these students learn the skills, I just care that they learn them. And so it's so amazing to hear that that's something y'all are pushing and allowing, because I think it's really powerful for the students to know that, yeah, you didn't get it this time, you have another try. You can keep trying until you get it. So I think that's a really powerful thing to encourage belonging and a sense of achievement in the students. So I'll go to the same question that I've asked the others, is where do you see the biggest need for improvement and how can we help?
This is Mr. Patton, give me a warning on this one. I've been thinking about it for a couple days. It's the theme that, keeps me up at night or wakes me up is some of the mental health needs of our students is above and beyond the scope to our staff. And I'm thankful for our additional counselors that are housed through our Island County and our ESD. And I'd be curious to see when I look at those 18 kids, some of the other factors that play into their mental health. It's some of those that also play a role in some of our challenges in academic growth. So we as a staff are adapting and learning and growing and still struggle with sometimes knowing, where does it end as an educator with our skill set and our ability. And we oftentimes find ourselves in collaboration with parents or family members of those students with some extreme mental health problems. And it's always nice to have that relationship, but that's probably one of our greatest challenges that we meet daily.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, Mr. Patton.
Okay, South Whidbey High School. First, I want to introduce the gentleman to the left of me. His name is John Summer. He is our science teacher, sports medicine teacher, head wrestling coach, various assistant coaches for different sports. But really importantly to me, he just started his admin internship. And already he's been really helpful with the absence of Paul, a little shorthanded. So he's been great and he's going to be a phenomenal administrator. So I just want to introduce him. So at the high school level, most of you are probably aware, but we don't have the school-wide diagnostic tools that the K-8 use. So, DIBELS and iReady are not geared towards high school. So really, basically, our assessments and our diagnostics take place within the classrooms. And I believe Director Williford got to partake in one of our assessments, a reading assessment, Mrs. Gandarius. Yep. And so that's just an example of the many different things that we use, such as MemBeam, et cetera. So I didn't have a lot of, most of the data at the high school level, you don't get until the spring. Your SBAC scores, somebody had a question about discipline rates. Those are things that we produce reports end of the year and we get to OSPI. So we have a lot of the data in June, late June. So I just wanted to share some first semester glimpses, some of the things that I look at constantly. And the first thing I wanted to, and I was really happy about this, is our first semester attendance. Usually pre-pandemic, we like to shoot for the 90 to 95% attendance rate. Last year, it was obviously in the 70s, a little bit low. But this year, first semester, we did really well. Compared to last year. In fact, 87.9% students are present daily. Our excused rate is 7.3% of our absences are excused and unexcused is 4.73. So really, I was pleased, but we need to still get back up to that 90-95% rate. Next slide. First semester grade distribution. Notice you will not see the bell-shaped curve. When I looked at this as a principal, some things really strike me. I always get at the end of every quarter, actually, I review with my staff our grade distribution. And we always look at the D and the F list, we call it. How many students are getting Ds and Fs? And if you look, actually our ninth graders, our Fs are really low. We want 0, obviously, but traditionally those would be up in the 20s and 30s, especially for that freshman group. Well, the one concern I have is our 10th grade class. And again, that was a class that had last year a pretty large amount of Ds and Fs, but it was a class that you have to remember really didn't have a 7th and 8th grade year. They were via Zoom. So socially, academically, they were behind. So that is really a group that we're really focusing on as far as academically and our student support team. Next slide. Our AP test scores, and again, this is from last spring, but again, I think it should be a brag for our school and for our community. Our AP Lit scores are well above 3.88. Remember, it's a scale of 5, 3.88. It's above our Washington average and also globally. Nationally and globally. And we had 87.5% of our students that took the test got a 3 or higher. And a 3 indicates basically is if you were to take a college class in that area, you would get at least a C or above. So that's a really good indicator for our AP Lit. AP US History, again, 3.5, well above the Washington State average. And again, 87.5% had a 3 or higher. AP Bio was phenomenal, again, 3.61, state average 3.3, and we had 83% that had a 3 or higher. And a lot of AP classes, again, a lot of the schools in the state and in the nation will count those as credits towards college. Some schools you have to have a 4, some even you have to have a 5, but 3 is kind of the threshold. Next slide. SAT and PSAT scores, and this is from this fall. So again, this is just a kind of a snapshot and a glimpse about some of the academics of our population of our students. Again, we're well above the state in everything and nation. ERW is basically it's evidence-based reading and writing. So basically the ELL component. And math, you look at our math score compared to the state, 534 to 502, again, well above. And that's for our seniors, and that's SAT. Our PSAT scores, again, higher than the state. Our reading and writing, well above, and our math, again, is above. And I think you also remember that this fall, I shared our SBAC scores from last spring, and we were well above, again, the state. I think 72% in science, and the state was 52%, something like that. But again, above in math, science, and ELA. Next slide. Okay, again, some snapshots, some highlights, some things that are implemented, restorative justice education, community circles, and restorative circles, staff and student training. Like Kayla said, we have 28 students that were trained, and actually we follow up with Dr. Mocha tomorrow with those students and continue the process, see what the next steps are, and listen to our students and what they want. Student voice, House of Reps. House of Reps is still, I think it's implemented. I think the system is there, but I think we just are right there. It's starting to work, and we had one meeting and then the fire alarm goes off. Remember that? Yeah, so it was great. And the House of Reps basically is every advisory has a representative, a student representative. So they all meet and they discuss, talk about issues at the school. What's going good, what's not going so well, report back to their students and their advisory, their classmates, and vice versa. So it's really an avenue of student voice. And I think it kind of encompasses more of the whole population of the school. I think there's a lot more diversity in that group than just maybe just your ASB leaders, et cetera. So that's an opportunity. I think that's gonna start happening more and more, and we wanna go at least monthly. Club representation. Again, we have, I think, 11 solid clubs right now. And again, I've never said no to any student that wanted to start a club. So as long as people ask, you know, I believe you have to approve those clubs and you'll get those. ASB student leaders have been great. Went in today and talked with our leadership class, a lot of student leaders in there. We had not a conflict, but what happened is right now our activities director is also out for the week. And we have a dance Saturday, and also I'm the acting AD. So we have a playoff game Saturday, but we also have a dance. So I had to talk to the girls basketball team. Okay, we can change the game time to 1 o'clock. We still can have the dance at 8:30. So I'm listening to student voice, but they're helping me. So it's a good thing. Restorative circles, restorative discipline, and restorative circles. I've been a part of multiple circles, restorative circles this year. Went to a whole class restorative circle, which went really well, I thought. I've been to circles with a parent and a teacher. I've been to circles with parent, teacher, student, and some other people. So again, it seems to me really effective with student to student. And I'm seeing real positive things about that. Student support team, again, a phenomenal team of people from the ESD, from the county, our guidance counselors. Mr. Summer is now on our student support team also. And it's, again, the weekly opportunity, we have a list now about 73 students that we track, that we are concerned about, and we want to support them and their families with various issues. And that's been real effective. Forefront Suicide Prevention Program, students have been trained by students, which is phenomenal. And actually, I think we had a guest speaker. We did last week, we had a guest speaker from the Forefront group, came and talked to our leadership class. And basically, we are one of the model schools for our state. And so I think that's something really to hold our hat on. And I think also next week, our staff is we have annual continued training. Next week, we're gonna have our staff trained 7/12 again, and by students, which is kind of neat. So those are things that are implemented and continuing. Some of those things are kind of in the initial stages, like rep assembly. I really want to get that really going. I'm a little impatient with it. I want to get going, but again, it's only been a few months. Some end of the year data that we use is the CEE data. I think that's really important information that we get from our students. You talk about belonging. How do you feel at school? Do you feel safe? But that's, again, great data to see about our kids and our staff. Our OSPI annual discipline rates, and I think there was a question, what the state wants is, it's called exclusionary days and expulsions. So exclusionary days can be suspensions, short-term, long-term suspensions. It also can be if a student is in ISS for a day, which is in-school suspension, that counts too. And also expulsions. And they want to know the expulsions, usually what type of expulsion, the exceptional misconduct, was it a threat? Was it drug related, et cetera? So they want that information. And they also want to know, which I think is good information, is our exclusionary and our expulsion, how does that look with our different special populations in our school, our marginalized populations? Is there an imbalance? So that's something that we can look at, and it's something that the state looks at. Healthy Youth Survey, again, that's another great bit of information from our students. And again, that's usually annual, and it depends on the year. Sometimes it's 9th, 12th graders, sometimes it's 10th, 12th graders. Again, that's really information about substance use, SEL, and things of that nature. So really the CE and the Healthy Youth Survey are the two major student survey data that we use as a staff. And again, student participation numbers and activities. Again, I think we're going to be 80 to 85% at least. We're probably there already, but I always like to wait till the end of the year again, because our spring sports, we have probably 2/3 of our student body participate. So again, I think our numbers are going to be high. Attendance data, which I shared. And usually, with our students that miss, it's usually a handful of students who miss many days. And why are they missing many days? Well, it could be something about the environment that they live in. They need support academically, they need support socially, et cetera. Next slide. Goal 2, best practices for learning. Again, I talked about at the very beginning, our pre-assessments, our student growth goals, which are all connected to the teacher evaluations. It's part of Danielson. And I think I shared this in the fall, is also, I think it's a great thing. Danielson, our evaluation tool, is also going to include, starting next year, and basically a standard about SEL. So again, sharing that with staff, and here we are. Why are community circles important? It's important for our students, but it's also something that we should be doing. Communication with students, with guardians and students. Parent Square, sorry, Chrissy, we're kind of a slow adopter at the high school, but I think it's a really good tool, and we're getting the hang of it and getting that information out. Also Skyward, et cetera. So I think we're getting the information out there. College and career ready preparation. Every fall, and this fall, we had a college night for 9th through 12th graders. Basic things about applications, Common App, financial aid. Also, we have something basically new to the state. It's called GAP. It's a guaranteed admissions program. And right now we have 19 students that are involved with that. And basically what that is based on a GPA and that you take certain required classes that you need for college, or your core classes, you can be automatically accepted to state schools in the state of Washington. So again, it's really kind of a fast track to admission. So you don't have to go through the whole admission process and wait. So it's guaranteed if you meet some requirements. So again, I think that's a great thing for our kids and also for the colleges. UDL, IPP professional development. Next week, we're doing staff peer observations. We're pairing up and we've had some PLC. I think our last PLC was 7/12 talking about UDL. And really when my staff anyways at the high school, well, what is UDL? What is universally designed learning? What does that mean? It's basically differentiated instruction. And a lot of our teachers are doing it. It's just a matter of identifying what they're doing and being able to explain that and being able to share that with our colleagues. End of the year data, again, for our, basically for our best practices in learning, our academics, are obviously our SBACs, our science state tests, our AP tests, our SAT scores, our summative and formative assessments in the classroom that happen quite frequently. Obviously, that's part of what our teachers do. And our teacher student growth goal. So all of our teachers turn in to me in October what their student growth goal is for their particular classes. And their evaluation is based on those goals. Marginalized student data. What I do is I look at the grade distribution, the test score distribution, even looking at how many of our students from special populations take AP classes, apply for college. I mean, there's so many things out there that you can look at to see, is that in balance? Is that equitable? And if not, how can we change it to make it better? Grade distribution talked about, and graduation rates, which again, I think it's something I've been really, really proud of, but it's not because of me, it's because of everybody in this room. I mean, you look at what our elementary teachers are doing, you look at what Kayla's doing, you look at our school board, it really, it's pretty impressive what we do to get it for our kids, to get them to graduate. And our post-high school matriculation, I shared that with you in the fall about last year's seniors, about where they're going, what they're doing. And again, it's neat, and I love it when they come back during Thanksgiving break and tell me how it's going and how college is going or how work or trade school or whatever the case is. So I think that's it. Any questions?
Always good to hear how it's going at the high school. Good to hear you're keeping body and soul together, even though you had dances and basketball and 18 other things happening, and that kids are helping out with that scheduling. I did have a question, and I think the question was asked of Dr. Fankhauser earlier around the discipline stuff. And especially in high school, that's always been a fairly structural model. If this, then that. And there was sort of an organizational chart that would lead to ISS or would lead to suspension or expulsion. Do you have any good examples of how restorative circles and social emotional learning have really, brought staff to different conclusions, maybe outside those structures? And especially for populations that maybe have been historically harmed by being overly disciplined?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think what I'm seeing is, and I'm gonna call it low-level discipline, class disruption, something off task. I remember back in the old days when I was an assistant principal, I would get a referral stack like that, every week and go through. And our teachers are not sending those kids, those situations down. They're taking care of them on their own. And what's happening is I really think has to do with the RJ Ed work and training that they're doing. Now, when it gets down to me, especially now, it's something that's really major that involves a suspension or emergency expulsion. So I'm seeing this huge change and shift where our teachers are are dealing with it, taking care of it, having that restorative conversations. I've been this week, I think I've been to 2 already restorative conversations between a teacher and a student. So it's not, there's no, after the restorative circle, you're not giving them detention or in-school suspension. You're trying to figure out where the problems come from, what's happening, and how the behavior can change. So it's been really positive.
Thank you so much for that.
Question about the forefront, the suicide prevention. So I've probably mentioned this before. I took the parent version of that. I thought it was really amazing. And so I'm really happy to see that the forefront folks themselves have looked at our implementation of it and said, you know, this is how it should be done. So my 2-part question. One is what led them to that conclusion? What did they see that they thought was a model? And then also for you personally and the leadership, what are the look-fors you're seeing that would lead you to believe that that a program like this is or isn't working?
Well, first, I think why we are a model program, we were one of the first school districts to actually go to the training at University of Washington. And we're evaluated on what we do by the program, by the University of Washington Forefront. So annually, we you know, we're excellent in all categories now. And we get phone calls from other districts about how we're implementing and how we're using. And also one of the head, I can't remember, doctor something, I can't remember. She came and actually talked to our Forefront group and just gave us kudos and sang our praises. So that's where we've got the great feedback. And the second part of the question was?
For you and the leadership team, what do you
Effectiveness?
look for to evaluate the efficacy of the program?
Well, what I see is, I think I'm going to be very transparent, is really the past 4 or 5 years, I think has been very, very difficult for our students. And I have weekly, I see and hear things that concern me about suicidal ideation with our students. And we have not had a tragedy recently. And I hope we do not have a tragedy. And so anytime, I think we have great sense, our administrators and our staff and our students have great sense and awareness for other students to make sure that they're safe and okay. And so I think that's something that our staff is highly cognizant of.
Thank you. I appreciate your vulnerability. I realize it's a very important topic.
Thank you. A couple of questions. You mentioned, if I heard correctly, special populations. What is a special population?
Special, you could call it, it's basically, think of it this way, Rufus, is it could be our special ed students. It could be our low socioeconomic students. It could be different races, ethnicities.
McKinney-Vento students?
Yeah, McKinney-Vento are homeless students. There's different subcategories through OSPI that we track and analyze.
And what happens with those special populations? What is it you do?
What is it I do? What I do is I track. I make sure that all of our students are getting equal access, that are scoring the same score averages as all of our students on state tests, to make sure that they get the, that they will take AP classes, that they have every opportunity that every student has, just to make sure that every school in every student in our school has the same opportunity. That's what I look at. And I don't want to disproportionately suspend students of low socioeconomic background. Does that make sense?
What I'm dancing around is the business. It seems that socially we are doing a lot of special identification of different types of people. At the same time, we're supposed to be unifying. And I'm wondering if there is any negative aspect to identifying a person as a special it seems to me we're at cross purposes. When we identify people as being special, that emphasizes whatever that speciality is.
Okay, so my job is to make sure that every one of our students is to unify our school, our students, to make sure that they all get equal access to everything that we offer.
If I can note something here, Rufus, it's my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, that this is all behind the scenes. This is not gathering all the students of low socioeconomic status or all the LGBTQ plus students or whatever population you're looking at and saying, how are y'all doing? No, it's just making sure that there aren't hidden problems, that particular populations aren't slipping through the cracks. And that's every population, including majority populations that are also examined that way. But you break it out to make sure that there aren't any students slipping through the cracks, that everyone has equal and equitable access to everything in the schools.
I understand the purpose and the goal, but once identified as a special population, it seems to me that has a negative connotation to it.
Okay, so why don't we take the word special out and use marginalized?
It seems like what is it, something without a significant difference. Well, enough of that. I've got the other issue that I wanted to talk about was it seemed that you emphasized post-high school college stuff. And I'm not sure that's correct. I may have misunderstood something. The kinds of things I'm thinking about are students who are currently employed while they're still in high school. Do you track that kind of thing? People who have jobs, students who have jobs?
No, I do not, unless they are through our CTE work-based learning program, which students get credit to work.
I actually had a similar question. So if I may, you were tracking a statistic called post-high school matriculation.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering if you could define matriculation.
Matriculation, basically, so we have something called the 13th year plan. It's called High School and Beyond, and every student has to complete that as part of their graduation. And basically, it's to work on what are you doing when you get out of high school? What does that 13th year look like?
And it really goes to our second goal this year of preparing students for a future of their own choosing. So whether they want to go into the military or immediately into an apprenticeship program or to community college or to call it a four-year college, wherever they want to go, we want to prepare them for that. And Mr. Patton's been excellent in the past at talking about all the different places that students are going to after South Liberty High School.
I'm concerned about balanced advice about what students can do after they leave school. College seems to be a very high priority and one that is laudable. The apprentice program that the chairman mentioned is also, and I'm curious, is the apprentice programs that are available, and are the opportunities within the military that are available? And I would like to amplify that because I was a beneficiary of the latter.
So Rufus, we have something called Snow Isle Skills Center, which we have 25 students go to for various, it's basically what you know as a trade school. Also last year we had, we didn't have any students enlist in the military, but we did have one student go on to a four-year school for ROTC. We have the Navy, Air Force, Army come to school during lunches and talk with kids who may be interested.
As the parent of a current senior, I can also speak to the experience that students are having. She is certainly supported in being an employed student going to school and getting credit for holding a job outside of school. And she's being encouraged to pursue her passions after high school. including the choices that she's faced with between several pathways, not all of which are university, but she's being directed towards opportunities to understand those pathways by the folks that she's working with at the school.
The point that I wanted to try to get across is that military recruiters will shine things up a lot. But the reality is that the military is desperate to have people who are well-educated and haven't gone to college. And they will, when I was in the service, they called it a Seaman to Admiral program. As I did, I had good scores when I enlisted in the Navy. And the Navy grabbed me and they said, we will send you here, we'll send you there, we'll do all kinds of things. And it wasn't a recruiting issue. It was at that point, it was a surprise. I had no idea that that kind of thing happened. And I think it would be useful if at the high school level, the opportunities that the military provide that are sometimes equal to trades or college level stuff. They are amazing opportunities. You have to give to get it. So you're doing something that nobody else has to do.
Well, I retired from the Marine Corps in 2020 and became a teacher. And I can assure you that our students are well versed in what the options in the military are. In fact, right now I'm working with a first lieutenant out of the Air Force to come in and talk to all of my classes next month about the opportunities that are available to them through college ROTC, not just in the Air Force, but in all 5 of the service schools. So I can tell you, sir, as a retired Marine, that the students are being given that information, and it's good information there, and that it's being pushed as a viable opportunity for them post high school.
My understanding is the services recruitment is down, and it seems to me there has to be a connection between that, and I'm wondering if the students are talk about what.
Mr. Rose, I think that this is that recruiting ratios for the services is getting beyond the questions and beyond the improvement plan for the high school. I'd like to redirect our attention back to that. It has been answered by both of our administrators that there are these opportunities and that they are provided. Did you have?
John, you heard me earlier ask the question about the trauma. In your school, do you have situations where you have a teacher has to deal with a traumatic situation? And if you do, or if you don't, do you have a policy which concerns clearing the room? You follow?
Yeah. Yes, we do, Bill. So what would happen is if a student has what I would call a breakdown or something's going on and it's not safe, we clear the room. But we also, students, I'll put it this way, students that might have that emotional breakdown usually have already an aide, a paraprofessional that is with that person. And that person is trained how to deal with it. And a lot of times there'll be other staff members that will help out. But first and foremost, it's always the safety of all the students.
Do you
No, we wouldn't want the teacher to deal with it. We would want the teacher to deal with either the professional who's paraprofessional who's trained, or myself or another administrator. Yeah.
I would just like to say it was really great seeing the strong engagement in extracurriculars. That's a huge part of SEL learning, not necessarily just in the classroom, but outside of that, and being able to connect with peers and express interests. To Rufus's point earlier, bringing up about identifying marginalized populations and analyzing barriers, we can't go through our equity work with blindness to identity, right? We need to identify systemic barriers and analyze where to break them down that certain student populations don't experience. So I think it's extremely important to recognize these systemic barriers, and by doing so, we need to recognize identity as well. I would also like to say, speaking on behalf of CTE, there's a really great snow owl program where students get to experience. There's a nursing program. I believe there's a welding class, an auto mechanic class. So there's really great opportunities for students to explore other pathways besides just like college. And I would say within the classroom and within our school, there's also lots of career and technical education credits and classes. I'm currently in an agriculture class that explores jobs within agriculture and food production, as well as going to different locations on Woodby and exploring people who are currently in those job positions.
Thank you, Audrey, for demonstrating our students, demonstrating our missions, goals, and values by explaining that better than any of the adults. I just want to note, I'm very interested in seeing how the House of Reps for both the middle and high school go. I think that's going to be a fantastic program to bubble up additional student voice from non-typical students. I love that. So if everyone will allow me, I'm going to wrap us up by asking the same question of Dr. Pat or Mr. Patton as everyone else is, where do you see the biggest need for improvement and how can we help?
I'm impatient. So I would like to see quicker progress with our staff on community circles in the actual classroom. And I think the more we go through training and the more that our early adopters, teachers can show and help, I think the better. Just one example, I'm not singling out saying specifically our pre-calculus teacher, but how do you intertwine academics into a community circle in a pre-calculus class? And those are some strategies I think that we're going to learn as we go. Again, we're only in the 6 months. But how can it really be embedded and not just socially, emotionally, but also academically? And again, I think the more tools we have for our teachers, I think the better. And the other piece too is with our House of Reps, again, I want to get the ball rolling quicker. What can you do to support me? I just want you to know that I feel well supported by our school board, by our superintendent. And what I really appreciate this, and I really mean this, is I've been here a while and I've never seen a more harmonious group on the school board. You are all together on our vision, our mission, our policies, the support. And that is really nice and comforting, I think, to us as administrators. So I just want to say thank you.
So thank you for asking us to give you a mid-year update as we go forward, because it really gives this amazing team a chance to shine. And I couldn't be prouder, because really the work that the board has laid out and the way that we've embraced it has been amazing. And the fact that we can see the connection between what students are seeing and what we're doing and how it's making a difference and how what you do makes a difference to this district. It's a really beautiful vantage point to be here and just watch this happen. Knowing all of the work, we're kind of like ducks, right? It looks really simple on the surface. But I wanted to also let the board know, because one of the things that Kayla brought up, which I think is really important, is that the mental health piece. Our ESD was awarded over $11 million this year for mental health counseling for our 35 districts in our region. That's a lot of money, and we're going to see some of that support come to our district. So that's a big plus. The other is we are going to be surveying staff on their buy-in with RJ Ed. There's been a huge buy-in, but I do think we have about 10% of folks who are kind of stonewalling. So how do we help them to move forward with us and to realize the benefit of the work that's happening? So that's coming, and you'll see that in March. We go over the superintendent's goals. And I'm not going to reiterate all you just learned, but again, what are the big picture things that are happening? So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank these folks because it's really, it just makes me feel good. So thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate very much the effort that clearly went into all of that and the day-to-day effort that goes into making all that stuff happen. We have policy on the agenda and it is already 8:45. We are without our policy expert. I'm going to be leaning very heavily on our administrators to explain these and to discuss these, but let's see if we can move through them pretty quickly without missing anything major. So the first thing we have is policy 1400, meeting conduct, order of business and quorum. This is a lot of updates based on the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic and changing how emergency meetings work and that sort of thing. Is there any questions or discussion on this one in particular? Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's essential updates, basically just saying that when emergencies happen, let's do it this way now that we've learned how we should do it. Anything you have to add? Yeah, I think this one's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, just a quick question about this one. Up above, there was sort of a multiple choice. Oh yeah, there it was. Which one do we fall into?
My understanding we're 2. Is that? Yeah.
2.
So that'll just, the top one will be cut out. And yeah. Anything else on this one? Okay, let's move on to 1420. This is the agenda and consent agenda. There's not a ton. It's mostly just wording things here and clarifying that at a special meeting, you can only take action on very specific emergency special meeting things. Everything else has to be done at a business meeting. Yeah. Any comments or questions on that one? Okay, let's move on to 2411, certificate of educational competency. This is about GEDs, is my understanding. Yeah, and it just goes into a lot of the details of who can get them and who should be allowed to get them and the process with which they can. And that is something I am quite happy to leave to the experts. Okay, let's move on from there to 3122, excused and unexcused absences.
Synchronous and asynchronous instruction.
Yeah.
Who thought we would ever have to define synchronous and asynchronous instruction? Synchronous being in real time, asynchronous being a video that you watch, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
I did have a couple of questions on this one. Does family, which is referenced in excused absences A2, for example, cover guardians without adding any other language? It seems like it does, but I'm not sure.
I think it does.
Yeah. I think it might be a good thing to reinforce the fact that non-traditional, non-nuclear families are families too.
Mhm.
However, tier system D, points 3 and 6, we need to get parent and guardian in there.
Parent and guardian, yes. Yep.
And will the requirement for point person or engagement team lead to more hours or work for staff? Or is it
We
something
already-
we're already doing?
It's something we're already doing. And Christy actually is the person who runs our issues of truancy. She'll run a truancy meeting. So we do have this in place.
Yeah, and on the lines of the are we doing, there's a change in here that requires the district to have separate policies for the definition of presence and absence for synchronous and asynchronous learning. Do we already have that, or will that need to be defined?
Needs to be defined.
The comments.
The reason this is happening is because, and we've not engaged in this, but for example, Seattle's engaging in remote instruction if they have an emergency closure because they're basically already going until July 1st anyway. And OSPI is taking a very hard line on whether or not this kind of instruction can count. And the only way it can count is if you actually engage students in synchronous instruction online. So that's where these policies are originating from. Nobody even thought they would happen. But after 3 years of a pandemic, knowing that we can do remote instruction, but that students may not necessarily have the ability to do it, right? If they're don't have the computer at home with them, for example, unless you know that the emergency is coming and you say to everybody, remember to have your laptop at home, it's hard to say to teachers engage in, synchronous instruction. So that's where it comes from.
Anything else on this policy? Okay, moving on to 3231, student records.
This was an interesting one about the diploma. So this does not stop the transcript,
Right.
right? If a student hasn't paid fines. This is about the physical diploma.
So you'll still get your transcript. You could still go on to wherever you're going afterwards if they need a
You
transcript.
still graduate.
You just don't get the paper.
Again, I'm not, however the board wants to
Mhm.
do this, it's your option. If you want to indicate that fees and that responsibility can be waived, but again, it does say students' records will be forwarded, et cetera, et cetera. This is literally,
Just the piece of paper.
yeah.
Yeah.
My gut instinct on this says that if a student is experiencing financial hardship to the degree that it is hard to pay for a fee, then being subject to loss of their physical proof of graduation would add hardship upon hardship. And I understand there may be students for whom failure to pay fees is less about financial hardship and more about a choice. But I hate to think of a student being penalized when it is a hardship matter.
Oh,
I was just going to say the issue with this is not, it's restitution for damages. So again, if a student comes in and says, I lost my laptop or iPad or whatever, it's highly unlikely that anything would occur. The impression, again, I'm seeing this like you're seeing this. It's not like I know the background. The impression I'm getting is intentionality versus hardship.
I appreciate that distinction. And it's also nice to be reminded that this doesn't refer to anything like sports fees, et cetera.
well, and that might be something we discuss is just pulling out the losing out of there. And so it is specifically about damage. I mean, that might be a midpoint, but I get the point. Now that you're back in the room, Mr. Patton, have you had to withhold a diploma for restitution of damages? Okay.
You
Right.
can't.
Right. Okay. I was just curious to know if it had come up, but if it's changed, yeah.
Dr. Moshe, if the board were to approve this change, how would you interpret the word restitution?
That's a great question. It depends, right? Especially during a restorative, we have restorative practices. So how are you going to repair the harm? If we actually are looking at a restorative process and the student has an inability to pay, that doesn't mean they can't repair the harm. So it's a very different interpretation. My caution about these things is I'm your superintendent now. I won't be your superintendent in 3 years. So what's that interpretation? These are the things that I think about, right? So I don't have a recommendation, but I think restitution in our pattern of moving forward in the world and getting keeping this culture of care, restitution doesn't necessarily mean money.
Student damages a bus seat, right? They poke holes in it. We have them come down and do something in the transportation department. Doesn't cost them anything, but it is their time and they're doing something as restitution. So I think there's many ways of looking at that. that is not just a financial impact to a person.
I wonder about
you.
adding in financial or otherwise, a parenthetical comment that's financial or otherwise, just to reinforce the idea that this isn't necessarily monetary.
I like that suggestion. And I also wonder if there might be room for 5 minutes discussion with the presence of our policy expert at our next meeting on this one. I'd like to understand her interpretation and what other districts are doing with language like this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, like Dr. Moshe said, restitution is such a relative term, depending on what that restitution looks like in our current, culture of care. And so I think knowing where policy meets practice and where that line is really important in something like this.
So I can also help with saying it does indicate the superintendent is establishing procedures. So we can certainly define restitution in procedures.
That's exciting. Thank you for the reminder.
So this seems like something we could leave as is, discuss with Andrea present, and make any amendments that we want to then. Students, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, just for clarification, would this only be applying to like physical equipment, or would also be applying to not paying fees?
No, this is only about damage to the district or equipment, right? So and that's the thing, damaging something intentionally versus accidentally. I mean, there's so much interpretation there. Yeah, it's not about, you didn't pay for your uniform or whatever.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that I think a lot of times losing is kind of connotated with unintentional. So maybe a change of wording there, I would suggest.
Just dashing down a couple of notes on what we've discussed to share with Andrea.
The other question I have, again, why was to put it in the student records policy around this kind of thing? Because again, your policy changes are often suggested by WASDA. So
Okay. Anything else on this one? Okay. We'll move on to the next one. 3421, child abuse, neglect, and exploitation prevention. This is one of the ones where I'm very sad Andrea is not here, because I had some questions on this one. I understand the primacy of parental decisions in a child's home life, but I'm concerned about both the explicit approval of corporal punishment in policy and about the removal of items D and G from policy. I'd love to get some legal input on our options and what liabilities they might entail if we were to exercise the option not to take some of the updates to this policy.
Yeah, I want to plus one that. So I believe the phrase that was added that you're referring to about physical discipline of a child by their parent or guardian, it sounds like it was excerpted from the Washington Code. Mm-hmm. However, it's taken out of context, and as written, it appears to give a very broad leeway to the physical and corporal punishment of a child by their parent, and I just don't think it's appropriate out of that context of the larger law in a school policy. I would feel much more comfortable if it said something like, please refer to Washington Administrative Code and then the number. And so those who are curious about the guidelines and laws around corporal punishment of a child can just go look at the law. We don't need to rewrite it in our policy.
So again, this one to me, I totally agree. Here's my concern with the way this is reworded, and I too want to get legal counsel. Again, this is how it's suggested to you. So we are mandated reporters. If a child comes in with a physical, it says my parent hit me, and they are marked by that, we are mandated reporters. We would call CPS. Now, what I'm seeing here is somehow I have to interpret whether or not it was appropriate corporal punishment. So yes, I agree with you that I think we need some counsel on this, because that feels really, again, nobody wants to get into the mode of parenting, right, but there was a very definite line. If a child is physically impacted by something a parent or guardian does to the point where they're left marked. So, again,
And if it's mandatorily reported, then the person it's reported to, CPE, can determine whether that was appropriate corporal
and
punishment
that's
based
how
on
it's
the law.
supposed to be.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
should not be doing that.
Correct.
And D and G, if you can scroll up just a touch, these were the ones that I was concerned about removing, is committing acts that are cruel or inhumane regardless of observable injury. And also engaging in actions or omissions resulting in the substantial risk of physical or mental health or development of the child. Like, I think that those really need to be on there as things we should not, that should be against our policy, and that we should be explicitly working to make sure do not occur anywhere to any of the students temporarily in our care.
I share all these concerns, and I also felt that removal of the line indicating something about removal of food from a child.
Mhm.
I just think many of these protections are in place because a school may be the only place where a child goes outside the home and can have a witness to experiences that may or may not be lawful at home. And so I agree that seeking legal counsel on the extent to which we can adapt this policy to protect our mandated reporters' rights to do their jobs, that would be great.
I will follow up.
Thank you. Any other comments on this one? Okay. Policy 3432, emergencies. A lot of new text in this one.
So just so you're aware, we do have school safety plans and procedures in place. We have a safety lead in our district, and that's Kayla. And, you know, again, we have everything included in the plan. Again, I'm not sure why we're seeing this as a new situation.
This seems like a situation where maybe someone didn't do some of the necessary stuff, and so they wanted to push it into policy for every school district. But yeah, that my question was, it seems to me like we've covered these things. We've already prepared this stuff.
And,
so
you
I was
know,
curious if there was anything
for
new.
example, review and update the school safety plans in conjunction with emergency response agencies. We do that. Conduct an inventory of hazardous materials. We pay the county every year to do that. We're required to do that. So again, I'm not sure, but
Feels like some of these policies are pushing RCWs and WACs into our policy.
which is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
again, I wish we had Director Downs here, but there is a lot of new text, although it makes sense to sort of contextualize what comes next, the existing policy, because the existing policy just sort of jumps right into a list of drills. And so it makes sense to sort of add the preamble of, well, you know, you're about to see a list of emergencies, and here's what we need you to do to prepare your staff and students and anyone that's going to be in the building to know how to respond in those emergencies. And it sounds like there won't be much additional work for the district to do because we would already be in compliance with the newly worded policy if the board approves. it.
Well, again, you know, in terms of the nuance and the depth that this goes to, we have all of these plans already in place. I just, you know, again, reading the fine print and making sure every I is dotted. But again, it's just odd to me that when these things go into policy that specifically, it seems unnecessary.
It's no longer at the 20,000 foot level that is usually
Right.
the board level.
Right. I mean, they're asking you to define each and every drill and what that looks like. So I'm not sure. Again,
I'd be interested to know what the reasoning behind this was. Why is this become, and I think that maybe is something that Director Downs can help us with.
Yep.
Anything else on this one? Our students or community members or admin? Okay, then we'll move on to our last one, policy 4210, regulation of dangerous weapons on school premises.
On this one, I just noticed a couple of opportunities to clarify spelling and correct minor typos. And I actually don't recall exactly where in the document, but I think one more proofreading pass through would be advisable, and I can do that before our next meeting.
Excellent. Yeah, I noticed two things in the first paragraph. First, the actual very start of it, it's missing a word there. And then second quote after school premises. I had a question for you, Dr. Moshe. Is there any major encumbrance to staff if we take up the two stricter provisions as listed here?
Again, if we scroll down, just scroll down, Christy, so we can get both of them on the screen.
Back up.
Too far,
Okay.
too far.
Yeah, those two. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's interesting that it goes this far. No district employee may bring any firearm or dangerous weapon onto district property without prior authorization of the superintendent. They're not allowed on school grounds, period. So why would we authorize someone to bring a firearm onto school grounds? We're not a district that engages in, we don't even have ROTC, so we don't have any reason to.
Yeah, I was thinking ROTC, SROs, or a
Right.
shooting club.
Right.
My
And-
understanding is that someone with a concealed carry could keep a weapon in their car unloaded. And what number one would change here is that they would only be able to do that with your approval.
So I don't think it does any harm. I think it gives us firmer ground. The second, number two, I definitely think I would recommend the board adopt, because we lease many properties and they're all very close to students. So I would want item 2.
Yeah, I was very inclined to
Yeah.
suggest both of these. So
Yep.
I wanted to make sure that we weren't putting an undue
Right.
burden on you. or
No,
yourself.
it actually gives it's no undue burden. I don't think I'm going to get a lot of requests to come in with a concealed weapon, but I could be wrong.
Well, and
Um,
as I'm sorry, as an individual who spends a lot of time in a rented facility and works with kids, I highly recommend as a citizen who does that work that be adopted.
Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, so points 1 and 2 apply to a district employee, and the second point would apply to like a person using district property. Could there be a point added for students like over 18 to not be able to carry a firearm? Or is that already in there?
I believe that's higher up in there. I think.
Okay, sorry, apologies.
I think basically one is just carving out an exclusion for if the superintendent specifically says that this person can do this for this purpose, they can. But that's, yeah. Or is it there? Or there's other part in this that talks about how you can't have firearms or weapons on school property.
And we do have those signs at all of our facilities. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much for helping us move through these quickly and efficiently. This meeting is adjourned. Good night.